Hello, it's Inchut here, or Sean Atleo, coming to you from unceded Algonquin territories, the Assembly of First Nations National Office in Ottawa. And for our March update, a number of things that we'd like to cover. First off, the speech from the throne and the federal budget. The speech from the throne came down March 3rd. And finally, in this speech, the government announced that it will take steps to endorse the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. A tremendous amount of work by many people to advance this, the importance of which includes guarantees within the Declaration for a minimum living standard for Indigenous peoples around the world, calls on governments to work with Indigenous peoples on principles of partnership and full inclusion. Principles that, of course, the ancestors outlined in their efforts in treaty making. We have heard concerns about the government's language that it expressed in its commitment to honor the Declaration, and we must continue to work together to ensure Canada gives its full support and endorsement as soon as possible and in full partnership with First Nations. The next day, the budget came down March 4th, and we've been pressing the government very hard for action, in particular in the area of education. While Budget 2010 does not invest in the change needed in First Nations education, it does support the need to reform and strengthen education and to work, as they said, hand in hand with us to move towards comparable education outcomes for First Nation students. And we have a tremendous amount of work yet to do in this area. The goal is to improve education opportunity and outcomes through enhanced commitments and to address any of the structural issues in terms of how education is developed and delivered across all of our respective territories. Very clear that we need to move to a guarantee for stable and fair funding when it comes to education. The government confirmed that they will conduct a review of the post-secondary student support program to ensure that students have the support that they need. And what the chiefs have called for in this regard is that we must bring forward a First Nations directed approach, that the reforms must lead to a greater investment and to recognize the critical role that First Nations communities have with respect to education, that it must respect our rights in our jurisdiction. And so, under the instruction and guidance of the chiefs, we're ready to fully engage in this work, with the goal being, as it has always been, First Nations control of First Nations education. Other budget commitments included commitment to renewal of health programs, really critical across many areas, including issues such as diabetes, fundamental issues around water and wastewater, and importantly, after decades of lobbying and marches and the press by many women leaders, especially across this country, is to address the issue of over 500 missing and murdered women. This was also identified in the budget, and these items and others are outlined in a bulletin that the Assembly of First Nation has sent out to all First Nations. We encourage you to review that. One of the major concerns that has arisen is the lack of funding support or renewals for the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, and so we're concerned about that. We need to work together to make sure to continue to support survivors and the good work of the AHF, and so advocacy will continue in this area, and updates will be provided as they're made available. An important update on the federal response to the McIver decision. They have now responded, tabled what is referred to as Bill C-3 in the House on March 11th. And we will, as we have been, continue to call on the federal government through Indian Affairs to provide clear information to First Nations governments and citizens about the impacts and implementation of this legislation. We're calling for additional and adequate resources for First Nations to respond to increases in their population, which some estimate could be as high as 45,000 people. While the legislation does address some inequities in the Indian Act, it does not address the fundamental issue of First Nations jurisdiction over our own citizenship. And it appears that the Minister of Indian Affairs is expressing an openness to working with us on this matter. And we're very thankful that Regional Chief George Stanley and Regional Chief Jody Wilson-Raybould on our national executive have agreed to lead us all in this work, and we and they will keep you informed of these developments and involved. And speaking of being involved, we want to invite all to our National Planning Forum taking place March 23rd to the 25th in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Really appreciating working with Regional Chief for Saskatchewan Guy Lonechild's office to create an opportunity for all to engage on issues with First Nations leaders. The agenda has been designed to examine the Assembly of First Nations strategic priorities and planning requirements with a focus on areas such as what I've mentioned, education, citizenship, but also developing sustainable economies in our communities with an eye to the environment. The draft agenda and registration you can find on our website, www.afn.ca. And don't forget, you can get more information on everything I've covered in our March bulletin, which is also on the website. And in conclusion, really want to congratulate and thank the 4 host First Nations chiefs recognized as heads of state in welcoming the world to their territories on the West Coast. Over 4 billion people watched. Many of our and your young people say to the world that we're still here. We're going to keep supporting one another and working together to create a better future for all of our peoples. Tlet go, tlet go. Thank you for taking the time.